I'm Odette Thorne, 32, and I am the forensic accountant who single-handedly dragged the Blackwood family legacy out of bankruptcy and into the billions. The silk of my emerald gown felt cool against my skin, but my blood was boiling hot. I stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, watching the people I had saved celebrate a victory they didn't earn. 5 years ago, the Blackwood name was synonymous with bad debt and crumbling infrastructure. It was a sinking ship. I was the one who bailaid out the water. I was the one who spent sleepless nights combing through decades of messy ledgers, finding the leaks, the embezzlement, and the rot. I restructured their entire portfolio. I turned their failing commercial real estate into a multi-billion-dollar empire. And tonight was supposed to be the celebration of our biggest quarter yet. I adjusted the diamond bracelet on my wrist, a gift I bought for myself, and took a deep breath. My husband, Julian, was standing near the bar, looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. He gave me a small, tight smile before turning back to his conversation. He looked nervous. I should have taken that as my first warning. I began to weave through the crowd, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. I needed to find Arthur. My father-in-law was the face of the company, but I was the brain. I spotted him near the center of the room, holding court with a group of potential investors from Tokyo. These were the men I had spent 6 months courting over Zoom calls and detailed financial reports. I had closed this deal. Arthur was just there to shake hands. I approached the circle, a polite, practiced smile plastered on my face. "Arthur," I said, my voice clear and projecting well over the low hum of the jazz band. "I see you found Mr. Tanaka." I was hoping to introduce. Arthur didn't even blink. He didn't turn his head. He didn't acknowledge my voice. He simply shifted his stance, physically blocking me from the circle with his broad shoulder. As I was saying, "Gentlemen," Arthur boomed, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "The Blackwood success is built on blood. It is a family trait. My son Julian and I have worked tirelessly to ensure these numbers." My step faltered. I froze. The heat of humiliation started at the base of my neck and crawled up toward my hairline. He was erasing me, right in front of the people who knew my signature was on every single contract. I tried again, stepping around to his other side, refusing to be invisible. "Mr. Tanaka," I said, extending my hand. "It's wonderful to finally meet you in person. I'm Odette." Mr. Tanaka looked at me, confusion flickering in his eyes as he reached for my hand. Arthur's hand shot out and intercepted the handshake. He clapped Mr. Tanaka on the shoulder, steering him away from me. "Odette," Arthur said, his tone sharp and dismissive, the way one speaks to a clumsy waitress. "We are discussing business. Go find Julian. I believe he spilled his drink and needs assistance." The silence that followed was deafening to me, even if the party raged on around us. Mr. Tanaka looked uncomfortable. The other investors looked down at their shoes. Arthur stared at me with eyes like cold, dead sharks. There was no warmth, there was no gratitude, there was only the look of a man looking at a nuisance. My stomach dropped through the floor. I wasn't a partner to him. I wasn't the savior of his legacy. I wasn't even his daughter-in-law. I was the help. I was an employee he had forgotten to pay, a tool he kept in the shed until he needed something fixed. My breath hitched in my throat, but I refused to let him see me crumble. I nodded once, sharp and mechanical. "Of course, Arthur," I whispered. I turned on my heel, my vision blurring slightly at the edges. I needed an ally. I needed my husband. I scanned the room frantically until I locked eyes with Julian. He was watching. He had seen the whole thing. He had seen his father treat his wife like a servant in front of the most important people in our industry. I walked toward him, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Julian," I hissed as I reached him, keeping my voice low. "Did you see that? He just dismissed me. He took credit for the Tanaka deal." Julian took a slow sip of his champagne. He didn't look angry. He didn't look ready to defend my honor. He looked tired. "Odette, please," he said, his voice a pathetic murmur. "Don't make a scene. Dad is he's under a lot of pressure tonight. Just let him have his moment." I felt like I had been slapped. "His moment?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Julian, I built this moment. I built this room. I built the trust fund that paid for that tuxedo you're wearing." Julian sighed, finally meeting my eyes. There was no love there. There was only cowardice. "You're being dramatic," he said, turning his back on me to signal the bartender. "Just go mingle with the wives. Talk about whatever it is you women talk about. Leave the business to the family." The world seemed to stop spinning. The sounds of the gala faded into a dull roar. "Leave the business to the family." The words echoed in my skull. I looked at Julian's back. I looked across the room at Arthur, who was laughing loudly, clutching a cigar I knew he wasn't supposed to smoke. I stood alone in the middle of the ballroom. I was surrounded by wealth I had created, wearing jewels I had bought, standing next to a husband who wouldn't look at me. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I wasn't one of them. I never had been. To them, I was just a calculator with a heartbeat. I was a useful idiot who had fixed their mess so they could go back to playing kings. A cold, dangerous calm settled over me, extinguishing the heat of my embarrassment. If I wasn't family, then I didn't owe them family loyalty. If I was just an employee, then it was time I collected my severance. I took a sip of a passing waiter's champagne, the bubbles tasting bitter on my tongue. They thought I was weak. They thought I would go cry in the bathroom and fix my makeup and come back smiling. They had forgotten one very important detail. I was the forensic accountant. I knew where the bodies were buried because I had dug the graves. And I knew exactly where Arthur kept the keys. I turned away from the crowded ballroom, leaving my cowardly husband and his champagne behind. My hands were shaking. It wasn't from the cold air conditioning of the gala hall. It was pure, unadulterated rage. I needed to get out of there. I needed 5 minutes of silence to recalibrate my strategy before I did something I would regret. I reached for my clutch, intending to call a car service and leave this wretched party early. My fingers grasped at empty silk. I froze. My clutch was light, too light. My phone was gone. My heart skipped a beat, a sudden jolt of panic cutting through my anger. My phone wasn't just a device, it was a vault. It contained the two-factor authentication codes for the entire Blackwood financial ecosystem. It held the encryption keys to the offshore accounts I had set up to protect their assets. If I lost that phone, I lost my leverage. I closed my eyes, forcing my mind to retrace my steps. Where had I been before the gala started? The study. Arthur's private study on the second floor. We had a brief, tense briefing about the Tanaka deal right before the guests arrived. I remembered setting my phone down on the edge of his massive mahogany desk while I walked him through the final yield projections. He had been so dismissive, so rude, that I had stormed out without picking it up. I couldn't leave it there. Not tonight. Not when I knew my standing in this family was disintegrating by the second. I slipped out the side entrance of the ballroom, avoiding the gaze of the security detail. The corridor was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the noise and heat of the party. The muffled thump of the bass from the jazz band faded as I ascended the grand staircase. My heels sank into the plush runner on the second floor landing. I moved quickly. I didn't want to be seen. I felt like a thief in my own home. No, not my home, their home. I reached the heavy mahogany doors of the study. They were imposing, carved with lions and vines, designed to intimidate anyone who stood before them. I placed my hand on the cold brass handle. I pushed. The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. The room was dark, lit only by the moonlight streaming through the French windows. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. I scanned the desk. There it was. The sleek black rectangle of my phone sat right where I had left it, glinting in the pale light. Relief washed over me. I took a step forward to grab it. Then I froze. Voices. They weren't coming from the hallway behind me. They were coming from the private annex, a smaller soundproofed office connected to the main study. The door to the annex cracked open. A slice of yellow light spilled across the Persian rug. "I don't care about the optics, Marcus," a voice growled. "Arthur," my blood turned to ice. "We need to execute the filing by Monday morning," a second voice replied. It was smooth, oily, and unmistakably arrogant. Marcus Sterling, Arthur's personal shark. He was the lead attorney the family used when they wanted to bury something deep or bury someone. They were walking into the study. I was standing in the middle of the room. I was completely exposed. There was no time to reach the main doors without being seen. If I ran, the movement would catch their eye. If I stayed, they would find me. Panic surged through me, electric and sharp. My eyes darted around the room. The desk was too open. The leather chairs were too low. The curtains. Heavy floor-to-ceiling velvet drapes that covered the wall of windows overlooking the estate. They were my only chance. I lunged. I moved with a speed I didn't know I possessed, fueled by pure adrenaline. I slipped behind the thick, emerald fabric just as the annex door swung fully open. I pressed my back against the cold glass of the window. I pulled the velvet tight around me, creating a cocoon of darkness. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The main overhead lights in the study flickered on. The sudden brightness seeped through the edges of the fabric, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I squeezed my eyes shut. I heard the heavy tread of Arthur's dress shoes on the hardwood floor. Click, clack, click, clack. He was close, too close. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was so loud. Surely they could hear it. Surely the sound of my pulse was echoing in the silent room. "Pour me a drink, Marcus," Arthur commanded, his voice sounding exhausted but triumphant. I heard the clink of crystal decanters. They were at the bar cart. The bar cart was less than 5 feet from my hiding spot. I could smell them. I smelled the stale scent of scotch being poured. I smelled the expensive cedarwood tobacco on Arthur's breath as he exhaled a sigh of relief. It was a smell I used to associate with power and safety. Now it smelled like rot. "You're sure she doesn't suspect?" Marcus asked. His voice was low, conspiratorial. My grip on the velvet tightened until my knuckles turned white. "Odette," Arthur scoffed. The sound of my name in his mouth made me nauseous. "She's a glorified calculator, Marcus. She looks at spreadsheets, not people. She thinks she's part of the dynasty because I let her play with the checkbook." I bit the inside of my cheek. I bit it so hard I tasted copper. "She's smart, Arthur," Marcus warned, the ice clinking in his glass. "If she sees the restructured documents." "She won't," Arthur interrupted, his voice dripping with malice. "Because by the time she realizes what's happened, she'll be locked out of the system and facing an indictment for embezzlement." The air in the room suddenly felt dangerously thin. My knees weakened. I almost slid down the wall. Embezzlement. He wasn't just firing me. He was framing me. He was going to take the work I had done, the fortune I had built, and use it to destroy my life. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. I peered through the tiny slit between the curtains. I saw their silhouettes against the frosted glass of the cabinet doors. Arthur was leaning back, swirling his drink, looking like a man who had just won a war. Marcus was leaning forward, predatory and eager. They were planning my execution. They were going to send me to prison for crimes they were about to commit. Terror was a cold hand gripping my throat. But beneath the terror, something else was waking up. Something dark, something primal. My phone was still on the desk, just a few feet away from them. But I didn't need it right now. I needed to listen. I realized then that I wasn't trapped with them. They were trapped in the room with me, and they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I'm Odette, 34 years old, and I spent the last decade guarding a billionaire's fortune only to realize I should have been guarding my own back. I pressed my ear against the cold glass of the window, my breath hitching in my throat. Arthur's voice dropped to a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the silent room. "She knows too much about the internal leaks in the Singapore division, Marcus," he said. I froze. I had flagged those leaks 2 days ago as a simple clerical error. I hadn't realized I was staring directly at Arthur's personal slush fund. "She's a bloodhound," Arthur continued, ice clinking in his glass. "If we let her keep digging, she'll find the bribes we paid to the zoning commission. So we terminate her." Marcus asked, his voice smooth and disinterested. "Termination is too messy," Arthur scoffed. "She'd sue, she'd talk. No, I needed something permanent." I heard the rustle of papers being thrown onto the desk. "I've already prepared the trail," Arthur said, his tone dripping with self-satisfaction. "Digital breadcrumbs, perfect, irrefutable proof." My heart stopped. "By tomorrow morning, the forensic audit will discover a pattern of unauthorized transfers," he said. I squeezed my eyes shut, my fingernails digging into the velvet drapes. $50 million, Arthur announced. "Siphoned directly into a shell company registered in Odette's maiden name." The air left my lungs. 50 million. He wasn't just firing me. He was burying me under a mountain of federal charges. "It's a master stroke," Marcus chuckled darkly. "Embezzlement on that scale carries a 20-year minimum." "Exactly," Arthur replied. "I've tipped off the SEC. They're coordinating with the FBI to execute the arrest warrant by Friday morning." Friday, that was 3 days away. "And the shares?" Marcus asked. "The moment the handcuffs click, the morality clause in her contract triggers," Arthur explained. "I seize her 15% stake in the company immediately. She walks away with nothing." My knees shook so hard I thought I would collapse against the window pane. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, hot and acidic. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "And the girl?" Marcus asked. My blood ran cold. "Chloe, my 4-year-old daughter." "That's the best part," Arthur said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "No family court judge in the country will grant custody to a mother facing a federal indictment for grand larceny." I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. "Julian will file for full custody on Friday afternoon," Arthur declared. "We take the girl. We raise her as a true Blackwood. We scrub Odette from her memory." Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, blinding fury. They wanted to take my life. They wanted to take my money. But now they were talking about taking my child. My head spun violently. I felt like I was drowning in dry land. "To the future," Arthur toasted. I heard the clink of crystal glasses. Arthur laughed, a dry and brittle sound that echoed off the mahogany walls. It was the sound of a man who believed he was untouchable. He poured another splash of scotch, the amber liquid glugging into the glass to celebrate my looming destruction. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the heavy curtain fabric just to stay silent. I wasn't just a problem to be solved. I was a sacrifice on the altar of his greed. But as the nausea faded, a cold resolve took its place. Arthur had made a fatal calculation. He thought he was framing a helpless mother. He forgot he was framing the woman who built his security system. I looked at my phone, still sitting on the desk just feet away from his hand. I didn't need it. I had everything I needed in my head. He wanted to frame me for moving $50 million? Fine. If I was going to do the time, I might as well do the crime. I checked my watch. It was 11:00 p.m. The banks in Zurich opened in 4 hours. I wasn't going to wait for Friday. I was going to empty them out tonight. I waited. I stood frozen behind the heavy velvet, my body rigid as a corpse. The air in the room was still thick with the smell of their scotch and their smug satisfaction. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. I heard the heavy oak door of the study click shut. Then came the silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against my eardrums. But I didn't move, not yet. I couldn't risk it. My legs were screaming in protest, the muscles cramping from standing motionless for so long. My lungs burned for a full, deep breath, but I forced myself to take shallow, silent sips of air. I waited until I heard the faint, distant chime of the front door security system engaging. Marcus was gone. Arthur would be heading upstairs to his master's suite. Only then did I peel my fingers away from the velvet. They were stiff and cold, shaped like claws. I pushed the fabric aside. The movement felt violent in the stillness of the room. I stepped out into the dim light. My knees buckled instantly. I grabbed the windowsill to steady myself, gasping as the blood rushed back into my legs. Needles of pain shot up my calves. I ignored them. I had to move. My eyes locked onto the mahogany desk, my phone. It was sitting right where I left it, a sleek black rectangle of glass that could have cost me everything. I lunged for it. I snatched it up, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I checked the screen. No missed calls, no notifications, just the time. 11:14 p.m. I had lost 14 minutes to terror. I couldn't lose another second. I slipped my shoes off. I held them in one hand, the leather cool against my clammy skin. I walked in my stocking feet across the sprawling Persian rug. I reached the study door and pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. I turned the brass handle. It turned noiselessly, a testament to the expensive maintenance I paid for. I slipped into the hallway. The house was a tomb. Moonlight spilled through the high windows, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. I moved like a ghost. I stayed close to the walls, avoiding the creaky floorboards I had memorized years ago. I reached the side entrance. I punched in the code to the alarm panel with trembling fingers. Beep, 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 green light. I slipped out into the night air. The cold wind hit my face like a slap. It shocked me back into my body. I ran to my car. I didn't care about the gravel digging into my feet through my stockings. I threw myself into the driver's seat and locked the doors. Only then did I let out the breath I had been holding. It came out as a ragged, broken sob. I clamped my hand over my mouth. "Pull yourself together, Odette," I whispered harshly. My voice sounded foreign. It sounded like shattered glass. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I peeled out of the driveway, watching the looming silhouette of Arthur's estate shrink in my rearview mirror. It looked like a monster crouching in the dark. I drove. I didn't remember the route. I drove in a trance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned translucent. The street lights blurred into long streaks of neon white, smearing across my vision like war paint. Every headlight behind me looked like a police cruiser. Every shadow looked like Marcus. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it pulsing in my fingertips, in my temples, in my teeth. $50 million, prison, losing Chloe. The words cycled through my mind like a nightmare carousel. I pulled into my own driveway. The house was dark. It used to look welcoming. Now it looked vulnerable. I killed the engine and sat in the silence for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. I wiped my palms on my skirt. They were slick with sweat. I got out and walked to the front door, my keys jingling loudly in the quiet night. I entered my home. I walked up the stairs, my legs heavy as lead. I pushed open the door to the master bedroom. Julian was there. He was fast asleep. He was lying on his back, one arm thrown carelessly over his head. The moonlight washed over his face, highlighting the soft curve of his jaw, the gentle slope of his nose. He looked peaceful. He looked innocent. A wave of bile rose in my throat. Did he know? Was he pretending to sleep? Was he dreaming about the custody papers he would sign on Friday? Arthur said, "Julian will file." He didn't say, "I will make Julian file." He said it with certainty. I looked at my husband, the man I had shared a bed with for 6 years, and I felt nothing but a cold, hollow dread. His chest rose and fell in a rhythmic, easy cadence. How could he sleep? How could he sleep when his father was sharpening the axe to decapitate our life? I backed out of the room. I couldn't look at him. If I stayed, I would scream. I walked down the hall to the nursery. I pushed the door open just an inch. The room smelled like lavender and baby powder. It was the smell of purity. I crept over to the crib. Chloe was curled up in a ball, clutching her worn-out stuffed rabbit. Her blonde curls were plastered to her forehead. Her little mouth was slightly open. She let out a tiny, soft sigh in her sleep. My knees gave out. I sank to the floor beside the crib, gripping the wooden bars like the bars of a cell. Tears finally spilled over, hot and fast. They wanted to take this. They wanted to take her. They wanted to erase me from her life. They wanted to turn her into a Blackwood, cold and cruel and empty. I reached through the bars and brushed a finger against her soft, warm cheek. "Over my dead body," I whispered. The fear in my gut didn't disappear. It transformed. It hardened. It crystallized into a jagged, icy resolve that felt like armor plating snapping into place over my heart. I stood up. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. I wasn't crying anymore. I was done crying. I walked out of the nursery and went downstairs to the kitchen. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. I knew this house. I knew where the loose floorboard was in the pantry. I crouched down and pried it up. Beneath it lay a black waterproof bag. I pulled it out. Inside was my emergency laptop. It was an air-gapped machine I used for deep system tests, completely separate from the company network, untraceable and unregistered. I sat at the kitchen island in the dark. The only light came from the blue glow of the screen as it booted up. It reflected in my wide, unblinking eyes. I cracked my knuckles. Arthur thought he was the only one who knew how to play dirty. He thought I was just a glorified calculator. He was right about one thing. I was a calculator, and I was about to subtract everything he owned. I logged into the backdoor of the Cayman server. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the firewall I had built myself. I disabled the logging protocols. I found the account. Project Icarus. Arthur's slush fund. The balance blinked on the screen, $214 million. I didn't hesitate. I opened a command terminal. I began to type the routing numbers for 20 different offshore accounts I had set up years ago as security tests that I never decommissioned. The cursor blinked, waiting for my command. Arthur wanted to frame me for taking 50 million. I smirked in the darkness. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a wolf's baring of teeth. I wasn't going to take 50 million. I hit enter. I was taking it all. I'm Odette, 34 years old, and I am the architect of the financial labyrinth that is about to swallow the Blackwood family whole. The blue light of the screen was the only thing existing in the universe. It washed over my face. It stung my tired eyes. I sat at the kitchen island, my legs wrapped around the stool, my body hunched over the keyboard like a pianist about to strike the final, discordant chord of a concerto. The house was silent around me. Upstairs, my husband slept the sleep of the ignorant. In the nursery, my daughter slept the sleep of the innocent. Down here in the dark, I was wide awake. I was the wolf at the door. I cracked my knuckles. The sound was sharp like a pistol shot in the quiet kitchen. I focused on the screen. This laptop wasn't just a computer, it was a weapon. I had built it 3 years ago during the merger with the Kensington Group when Arthur had demanded I creative account our way out of a tax liability. I did what he asked, but I also built a trapdoor. I initiated the connection. A terminal window popped up, a simple black box with a blinking green cursor. It looked primitive. It looked harmless. It was the most dangerous thing in the house. I began to type. My fingers didn't feel like my own. They felt like independent entities, fueled by adrenaline and rage. SSH root at 192.168XX P4492. I wasn't attacking the front gate. Arthur had hired a team of cybersecurity experts last month to harden the perimeter. He spent $200,000 on firewalls. He spent another $100,000 on intrusion detection systems. I watched the connection protocol's handshake on the screen. He wasted his money. He fortified the walls, but he forgot who poured the foundation. I was inside the network before the system even registered a login attempt. I navigated through the directory structure, moving past the decoy accounts I had set up for the auditors. I bypassed the operational funds. I ignored the real estate holdings. I was hunting for something specific. I was hunting for the ghosts. My eyes scanned the lines of code cascading down the screen. To anyone else, this was just data. To me, it was a map. I could see the flow of capital like blood moving through veins. I saw the pulses of revenue. I saw the clots of debt. And then I saw the hemorrhage. There was a data stream diverted from the Singapore holdings, routed through a shell company in Delaware and vanishing into a void. I smiled. It was a cold, humorless stretching of my lips. Got you, I whispered. I followed the stream. It led to a secure partition on the server that didn't show up on the standard administrative dashboard. It was invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. I reached the gate. The system demanded a password. This was the moment of truth. If Arthur had been smart, if he had listened to even one of the security briefings I used to lead, he would have generated a random 256-bit encryption key. He would have used a hardware token. He would have made this vault impenetrable. But Arthur Blackwood wasn't smart. He was arrogant. He believed he was untouchable. He believed he was a god in his own little universe. And gods don't need complex passwords. I typed in the one string of characters Arthur used for everything that mattered to him: his private safe, his alarm code, his mistress's apartment building. Midas touch 1. I hit enter. The cursor blinked once, twice. Access granted. I let out a breath that shuddered in my chest. He was so predictable it was pathetic. The directory opened. Files spilled out onto my screen. Spreadsheets, PDFs of bank statements, deeds to properties I didn't know existed. And there at the top of the list was the master file. Phantom Ledger FY24 XLS. I opened it. The spreadsheet loaded, cell after cell populating with numbers that represented power, influence, and corruption. I scrolled to the bottom line. My breath hitched. I leaned closer to the screen, the blue light reflecting in my widened pupils. The number sat there, bold and unapologetic. $48 million, $48 million, liquid, untraceable, sitting in a series of accounts in the Cayman Islands that bore no name, only a routing number. I stared at the zeros. 6 of them. They looked like little open mouths screaming at me. This wasn't just money. This was Arthur's safety net. This was the war chest he planned to use to destroy me, to bribe judges, to pay for the lawyers who would take Chloe away. He had been siphoning this off for years, skimming from the company profits while claiming margins were tight, denying Julian a raise while he hoarded millions in the dark. A surge of electricity shot through my fingertips. It traveled up my arms, zipping along my nerves, exploding in the base of my neck. My hands started to shake, not from fear, from power. For 6 years, I had been the dutiful daughter-in-law. I had fixed their messes. I had balanced their books. I had smiled at their dinner parties while they made subtle digs about my pedestrian background. I had let them treat me like a glorified calculator. Well, the calculator was done adding. It was time to subtract. I looked at the time in the corner of the screen. 11:42 p.m. Zurich was waking up. The Caymans were asleep. The digital world was wide open. I opened a second window. I pulled up the routing interface for the offshore accounts I controlled, the ones I had set up as honeypots years ago and never decommissioned. They were empty shells waiting to be filled. I looked back at the phantom ledger. I could see Arthur's face in my mind. I could see the smug look he gave Marcus in the study. She'll be in handcuffs by Friday. I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, hot and acidic. He thought he was playing chess. He didn't realize I had already flipped the board. I positioned my fingers over the keys. My forensic training took over. I wasn't just going to steal it. I was going to surgically remove it. I was going to make the money disappear so thoroughly that even the best forensic accountants in the world, people like me, would spend decades trying to find it. I typed the transfer command. Initiate batch transfer. Source: Phantom Ledger. Root: destination redacted. Amount: $48 million. The prompt flashed. Are you sure? YN. I looked at the Y key. It looked like a trigger. My heart hammered against my ribs, a war drum beating a rhythm of pure, unadulterated vengeance. If I did this, there was no going back. This was grand larceny. This was a federal crime. This was a declaration of war. I thought of Chloe sleeping in her crib. I thought of her holding that worn-out rabbit. I thought of Arthur's voice saying, "We take the child." My finger hovered over the key. The metal felt cool. "Watch me," I whispered to the empty room. I pressed down. I'm Odette, 34 years old, and I am the architect of the financial labyrinth that is about to swallow the Blackwood family whole. I pressed the key. I waited for the rush of victory. I waited for the screen to tell me that $48 million had just vanished into the ether. It didn't happen. Instead of a confirmation banner, the screen flashed a violent, angry red. A dialog box popped up in the center of the monitor. Error 99, two-factor authentication required. Hardware token missing. Please insert USB key or enter RSA code. My heart stopped beating. I mean that literally. For a terrifying second, the blood in my veins turned to ice and my chest seized up as if I'd been punched. I stared at the blinking prompt. "No," I whispered. My voice cracked in the silence of the kitchen. "No, no, no." I slammed my fist onto the marble counter. Pain shot up my wrist, but I welcomed it. It grounded me. It kept the panic from taking over completely. Arthur wasn't tech-savvy. He barely knew how to open a PDF. But the expensive consultants he hired last month must have insisted on physical security for the highest-level transfers. They had installed a hardware gate. I knew exactly what the system was asking for. It wasn't a password, it was a physical object. A small, gray RSA fob that generated a new 6-digit code every 60 seconds. I closed my eyes. I could see it clearly in my mind. It was on Arthur's keychain. The leather one with the Blackwood crest stamped into it. He kept it on his nightstand, right next to his reading glasses and his glass of scotch. He slept with it within arm's reach. I looked at the timer on the screen. Session timeout, 14:59, 14:58, 14:57. I had 15 minutes before the session expired. If the timer hit 0, the system would lock down. It would flag the activity as suspicious. It would send an alert directly to Arthur's phone. He would wake up, he would see the transfer attempt, and my life would be over. I looked at the car keys sitting on the hook by the door. The Blackwood estate was 3 miles away, 3 miles of winding suburban roads. I grabbed the keys. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about Chloe sleeping upstairs. I was running on pure, uncut adrenaline. I sprinted to the garage, my bare feet slapping against the cold tile. I jumped into my sedan and hit the ignition. I didn't wait for the garage door to fully open before I reversed out, scraping the side mirror against the frame. I didn't care. I threw the car into drive and floored it. The tires shrieked, a high-pitched scream that tore through the quiet neighborhood. I checked the dashboard clock. 11:46 p.m. I had 13 minutes. I drove like a woman possessed. I blew through the stop sign at the end of the street. I took the corner onto Highland Avenue so fast the back end of the car fish-tailed. I wrestled the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. The streetlights blurred into streaks of orange fire. My mind was racing faster than the engine. I had to get into the house. I had to get up the stairs. I had to get into his bedroom. I had to steal the keys from under the nose of a sleeping monster. And I had to do it without waking him up. If he woke up, I pushed the thought away. I couldn't afford fear right now. I needed precision. I saw the iron gates of the Blackwood estate approaching on the left. I killed the headlights. Everything went pitch black. I was driving blind, guided only by memory and the faint glow of the moon. I steered the car onto the grass verge, 50 yards down from the main entrance. I couldn't risk the gravel driveway. The crunch of stones would sound like explosions in the silent night. I killed the engine. I looked at my phone. 11:51 p.m. 8 minutes left. I jumped out of the car. The night air was freezing, biting through my thin sweater, but I was sweating. I ran toward the perimeter wall. I knew a spot where the ivy had overgrown the brickwork. Julian and I used to sneak out this way when we first started dating, back when I thought this family was just eccentric, not evil. I found the foothold. I hauled myself up. The rough brick scraped my palms raw. I swung my leg over the top and dropped down onto the manicured lawn on the other side. I landed in a crouch, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house loomed ahead of me. It was a Gothic nightmare of stone and glass, rising up against the sky like a tombstone. Every window was dark. It looked like a sleeping beast waiting to snap its jaws shut. I sprinted across the lawn, sticking to the shadows of the oak trees. I made it to the servants' entrance on the east wing. This was the weak point. Arthur spent thousands securing the front door and the main gates, but he treated the staff like furniture and he treated their entrance with the same disregard. I stared at the keypad mounted on the wall. A small red light blinked at me. It looked like a demonic eye. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans. I had to remember the code. They changed the main codes monthly. But the staff code, Arthur was too lazy to memorize a new one for the housekeeper every few weeks. He hadn't changed it in 5 years. Please, God, let him be lazy. Please let his arrogance be his undoing. My finger hovered over the keypad. My hand was shaking so badly I had to grab my own wrist to steady it. I typed 19840. I hit the pound key. I held my breath. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. The light blinked red. My stomach dropped. No, I hissed. Then it flickered, green. A heavy mechanical clunk echoed from inside the door mechanism. To my heightened senses, it sounded like a gunshot. It echoed in my skull, bouncing around my brain. I froze, pressing my back against the cold stone wall. I waited for the sirens. I waited for the floodlights. I waited for the dogs. Nothing. Just the wind in the trees and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I was in. I pushed the handle down and slipped inside. The air in the house smelled like lemon polish and old money. It smelled like judgment. I checked my phone again. 11:54 p.m. 5 minutes. I had to cross the house, climb the grand staircase, and enter the master's suite. I took off my shoes. I left them by the door. I moved in my socks, silent as a ghost, silent as the ruin I was about to bring down upon them. I crept through the kitchen. I passed the dining room where they had sneered at my table manners. I passed the study where Arthur had planned to take my daughter away from me. I reached the bottom of the stairs. They stretched up into the darkness. I started to climb. Every creak of the wood sounded like a scream. I reached the landing. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. I could hear the rhythmic sound of snoring. Arthur. He was sleeping. He was dreaming of his millions. He was dreaming of destroying me. I crept to the doorway and peered inside. The room was vast, shadowed, and cold. And there on the nightstand, illuminated by the faint green glow of a digital alarm clock, was the keychain. I took a step into the room. The floorboard groaned under my weight. Arthur's snoring stopped. I froze. He shifted in the bed. The sheets rustled. "Who's there?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I stopped breathing. I became part of the darkness. I was the wolf. And I was already in the sheep pen. I'm Odette, 34 years old, and I am currently standing in the bedroom of the man who threatened to steal my daughter, holding my breath while he sleeps 5 feet away. "Who's there?" Arthur mumbled again. The words hung in the darkness like smoke. My entire body turned to stone. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth to stop my teeth from chattering. My heart was a trapped bird, battering against my ribcage so hard I was certain he could hear it. Thump, thump, thump. It was deafening in my own ears. Arthur shifted his weight on the mattress. The expensive Egyptian cotton sheets rustled, a sound like dry leaves scraping together. He smacked his lips. He let out a long, heavy sigh. I watched his silhouette in the dim light. "Please, please go back to sleep. Please don't turn on the lamp." If he turned on the lamp, it was over. He would see me standing there in my black sweater and dark jeans, barefoot and trembling. He would call the police. He would call his lawyers. He would take Chloe before the sun came up. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3, a minute passed. It felt like a decade. Then finally the rhythm returned. A low, guttural snore rumbled from his throat. HRRRKKKSHHH. It grew louder. HRRRKKKSHHH. He was out. Oxygen rushed back into my lungs, burning cold and sharp. I peeled my back off the doorframe. I checked the glowing green numbers on his alarm clock. 11:57 p.m. I had 3 minutes before the banking session on my home computer timed out. 3 minutes to get the code, get out, and wait. I couldn't drive back. There wasn't time to drive 3 miles back to my house to enter the code. Panic flared in my chest, hot and blinding. Then I remembered my phone. I had the banking app installed. I could approve the transfer from the app if I had the token code. But I had to get the token first. I took a step forward. My sock-clad foot sank into the plush carpet. It was silent. Thank God for Arthur's obsession with luxury flooring. I took another step. The room smelled of stale cognac and old paper, a scent that had always made me nauseous. It was the smell of his power, the smell of his arrogance. I crept toward the nightstand on the left side of the bed. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. I saw the glass of water. I saw the reading glasses folded neatly. And there, just behind the lamp base, was the glint of metal. The keys, the RSA token was attached to them. It was a small, gray plastic oval that held the 6-digit key to my freedom. I was 3 feet away. 2 feet. I was standing right beside him now. I could feel the heat radiating off his body. I could smell the sourness of his breath. This was the man who called me unfit. This was the man who told my husband I was trash from the wrong side of the river. Rage boiled up inside me, mixing with the fear, creating a potent cocktail of adrenaline. I focused on the nightstand. I reached out. My hand was shaking. I willed it to stop. Steady, Odette. Do it for Chloe. My fingers brushed the cold brass of the lamp base. I froze. I adjusted my angle. I hovered my fingers over the keys. If they jingled, he would wake up. If I knocked the water glass over, he would wake up. I had to be surgical. I lowered my hand slowly like a claw machine game. My thumb and forefinger pinched the leather fob of the keychain. The leather was warm. It had been in his pocket all day. I lifted. I moved with agonizing slowness. One key clicked against another, tink. The sound was microscopic, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a cymbal crash. I froze again. Arthur snorted. He stopped snoring. He turned his head on the pillow, facing me. His eyes were closed, but his face was inches from my hip. I could see the pores on his nose. I could see the twitch of his eyelid. I didn't move. I held the keys suspended in the air, their weight heavy in my grip. He smacked his lips again, muttered something unintelligible, and settled deeper into the pillow. The snoring resumed. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I had them. I pulled the keys close to my chest to stifle any noise. I turned around. The walk back to the door felt miles longer than the walk in. My legs felt like jelly. Every muscle in my body was coiled tight, ready to sprint, ready to fight. I reached the doorway. I slipped into the hallway. I didn't stop. I moved quickly now, the carpet muffling my hurried steps. I reached the top of the stairs. The moonlight from the landing window hit the keys in my hand. I scrambled to find the gray token. My fingers fumbled with the jagged metal of the house keys and the car keys. There it was. The small LCD screen was blank. I pressed the button on the side. Nothing happened. My stomach dropped. I pressed it again, harder. A series of dashes flashed across the tiny screen. Come on, then the numbers appeared. For 92018, I pulled my phone out of my back pocket with my other hand. My screen brightness was turned all the way down, but it still looked like a spotlight in the dark hallway. I opened the banking app. It prompted me to resume the session. Enter security code. My thumbs flew across the glass screen. 492018. I hit verify. A spinning wheel appeared on the screen. It spun and spun. I looked back toward the bedroom door. Was the snoring still happening? I couldn't hear it over the blood rushing in my ears. The floorboard at the top of the stairs creaked loudly as I shifted my weight. I flinched, looking down into the dark abyss of the foyer. The house felt like it was waking up. The shadows seemed to be stretching toward me. I looked back at the phone. The wheel stopped. A green check mark appeared. Identity verified. Transfer in progress. Tears pricked my eyes. I didn't wait for it to finish. I had to put the keys back. If Arthur woke up in the morning and his keys were gone, he would know. He would lock down the accounts before the ACH transfer fully cleared. He would call the bank and claim fraud. He would stop me. I had to put them back exactly where I found them. I stared at the open bedroom door. Going in once was suicide. Going in twice was madness, but I had no choice. I was already a thief. I was already a criminal. I had to be a ghost. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of lemon polish and fear. I turned back toward the master suite. I crept back to the doorway. The snoring was still rhythmic, still heavy. I stepped inside. The darkness felt thicker this time, more oppressive. I moved to the nightstand. I didn't look at his face. I couldn't bear to look at him. I focused on the empty spot beside the water glass. I lowered the keys slowly, slowly. I set them down on the wood. Click. It was louder than before. Arthur grunted. His eyes snapped open. He looked right at me. I'm Odette, 34 years old, and I have exactly 45 minutes to bankrupt a millionaire before he wakes up and takes my daughter away forever. His eyes were open. They were staring right at me. My heart stopped beating. My blood turned to ice in my veins. I waited for the scream. I waited for him to lunge, but he didn't blink. His pupils were dilated, unfocused, swimming in a milky haze of sleep and medication. He wasn't seeing me, he was looking through me. Martha, he whispered, his voice cracking. He was talking to his dead wife. I didn't answer, I didn't breathe. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, his eyelids fluttering shut as he rolled onto his side, turning his back to me. The snoring resumed instantly. I almost collapsed right there on the carpet. I backed out of the room. I didn't feel my feet touching the floor. I flew down the stairs. I burst out the front door into the cool night air. I ran to my car, parked 3 blocks away in the shadows of an oak tree. I fumbled with the ignition. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped my keys twice. Finally, the engine roared to life. I drove. I didn't look back. I tore through the sleeping suburbs, running 2 red lights, fueled by pure, distilled panic. I made it home. I locked the door. I engaged the deadbolt. I ran to the kitchen island. It was 3:15 a.m. I opened my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh, artificial glow across my trembling hands. I pulled the gray hardware token from my pocket, the one I had synced with the stolen code before putting the physical keys back. I plugged it into the USB port. It pulsed with a soft blue light. This was it. I logged into the main portal. Arthur's accounts lay spread out before me like a dissected frog. Checking, savings, investment portfolio, offshore holdings. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dollars. Money he used to buy judges. Money he used to silence victims. Money he was going to use to bury me. I opened a second window. I initiated the protocol I had designed 5 years ago, back when I first started noticing the discrepancies in the family ledger. I called it the Ghost Protocol. I began the transfers. I didn't send the money to myself. That would be too easy to trace. That would get me arrested. Instead, I routed the funds through 12 different shell companies I had established as a contingency plan. Ariadne Consulting, Cerberus Logistics, Nemesis Holdings. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Click, clack, enter. I moved the liquidity first. 300,000 from the primary checking. Gone. I moved the savings next. 2.5 million. Gone. I started liquidating the stocks. It required an emergency override code. I looked at the blue light on the token. The numbers flashed. 882190. I typed them in. Access granted. I sold it all. Market value. Immediate execution. The progress bar appeared on the screen. It was a thin green line. It crawled 10%. My eyes burned from the strain. I felt like I had sand under my eyelids. 25%. I didn't blink. I couldn't look away. If the connection dropped now, I was dead. If the bank's fraud detection algorithms woke up, I was dead. I took a sip of water, but my throat was so tight I nearly choked. 50%. The house settled around me. The refrigerator hummed. Every noise sounded like a police siren. I checked the time. 4:15 a.m. He would be waking up in 2 hours. He always woke up at 6:00 a.m. sharp to check the markets. 75%. Come on, I whispered. Come on, you piece of junk. My stomach cramped. Nausea rolled over me in waves. I was dismantling an empire with a MacBook and a terrified prayer. 90%. The green line was agonizingly slow. It paused. My heart hammered against my ribs. Don't freeze. Please don't freeze. 95%, 98%, 99%. I held my breath until my lungs screamed. The screen flashed white. A notification popped up in the center of the display. Transfer complete. Remaining balance $0. I stared at the zeros. They were the most beautiful things I had ever seen. It was done. He was empty. He was hollow. I sat back in the kitchen chair, the plastic digging into my spine. A sound escaped my throat. It started as a whimper, then it turned into a giggle. Then it erupted into a full-blown, hysterical laugh that I couldn't control. I clamped my hands over my mouth to stifle the noise, rocking back and forth. Tears streamed down my face. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek to stop the laughter. I tasted copper. Blood filled my mouth, metallic and sharp. I swallowed it. I looked at the clock, 4:42 a.m. I had destroyed him, but now came the hard part. Now I had to survive the morning. I'm Odette, 34 years old, and I just burned my husband's inheritance to the ground while he slept upstairs. The adrenaline crash hit me the moment the laptop screen went black. My hand stopped shaking. A strange, cold calm settled over my bones. I stood up from the kitchen island. My legs felt heavy, like they were filled with wet sand. I looked out the window above the sink. The horizon was beginning to bruise. A deep, angry purple was bleeding into the ink-black sky. Dawn was coming. Arthur would wake up in 60 minutes. He would reach for his phone. He would check his accounts. And he would scream. I couldn't be here when that happened. I turned away from the window. I moved through the house that had been my prison for 7 years. I didn't look at the expensive art on the walls. I didn't look at the crystal chandelier in the foyer. It wasn't mine. None of it was mine. I walked up the stairs, skipping the squeaky step out of habit. I went into the nursery first. The room smelled like lavender and baby powder. Chloe was curled up in a tight ball, her thumb resting near her mouth. She looked so peaceful. She had no idea her mother had just become a fugitive. I grabbed the duffel bag from the top of her closet. I didn't pack clothes. Clothes could be replaced. I packed the things that mattered. Her worn-out stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hops, the music box my mother gave her before she passed, her asthma inhaler, her favorite blanket with the satin trim. I moved fast. My movements were sharp, precise. I zipped the bag. I slung it over my shoulder. I went to the master bedroom next. I pushed the door open just an inch. Julian was still asleep. He was sprawled out on his stomach, one arm hanging off the bed. He looked innocent. He wasn't, though. He knew what his father did. He knew where the money came from. He just chose not to look. He chose the Porsche over the truth. I went to the walk-in closet. I grabbed my go bag, the one I had hidden behind the winter coats 3 months ago. It had my passport. It had $5,000 in cash I had siphoned from the grocery budget. It had a burner phone. I took nothing else, no jewelry, no designer dresses. I wanted nothing that Arthur's blood money had paid for. I walked back to the bed. I looked at Julian one last time. I felt a pang of sadness, sharp and sudden. I had loved him once, before I knew he was a coward. I turned around and walked out. I went back to the nursery. I lifted Chloe gently. She stirred, making a small, sleepy sound. "SHH," I whispered, pressing my lips to her forehead. "It's okay, baby, we're going on an adventure." She didn't wake up. Her head fell onto my shoulder, heavy and warm. I carried her downstairs. The sun was cresting now. The light was turning gray and harsh. I strapped Chloe into her car seat in the entryway. She shifted but stayed asleep. I took a deep breath. I had one last thing to do. I walked into the kitchen. The smell hit me first, fresh coffee, rich, dark, and normal. It was such a domestic smell. It felt wrong. It felt like a lie. Julian was standing at the counter. He was wearing his silk robe. His hair was messy from sleep. He was pouring a mug of coffee, staring blankly at the steam rising from the cup. He heard my footsteps. He turned around. A smile started to form on his lips, then froze. He saw my coat. He saw the car keys in my hand. He saw the look in my eyes. "Odette," he asked, his voice rough with sleep. What are you doing? Is everything okay? He looked at the clock on the microwave. 5:15 a.m. Where are you going? He asked. I didn't answer. I walked up to him. I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the manila envelope. It was thick. Inside were the divorce papers I had signed 3 days ago. And taped to the papers was a silver flash drive. It contained everything. The ledgers, the emails, the recordings of Arthur threatening the zoning board, the proof of the wire transfers I had just executed. I held it out to him. My hand was steady. Take it, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, cold. Julian frowned. He set his coffee mug down on the counter. What is this? He asked, reaching for the envelope. The truth, I said. He opened the flap. He pulled out the papers. He saw the bold letters at the top, petition for dissolution of marriage. His face went pale. Odette, he stammered. What is this? We can talk about this. You don't just. Then he saw the flash drive. He froze. His eyes snapped up to mine. The confusion vanished. It was replaced by a dawn of horrifying recognition. He knew that drive. He knew his father kept it in the safe. Where did you get this? He whispered. The color drained from his lips. He looked like he was going to be sick. It doesn't matter, I said. Do you know what's on this? He hissed, looking toward the ceiling, terrified his father might hear through the floorboards. Do you have any idea what he'll do if he finds out you touched this? He won't do anything, I said. I took a step back. Why? Julian asked, his voice trembling. Because he doesn't have the resources anymore, I said. Julian stared at me. He didn't understand, not yet, but he would. In about 45 minutes his phone would ring, and his life would end. Goodbye, Julian, I said. I turned around. Odette, wait, he shouted. He lunged toward me. I spun around, my hand flying to my pocket where I kept the pepper spray. He stopped. He saw the resolve in my face. He saw that the woman who used to ask for permission to buy curtains was dead. He slumped against the counter, defeated, weak. I walked to the door. I opened it. The morning air was crisp and cold. It tasted like freedom. I stepped out onto the porch. I closed the door behind me. I felt the weight of the house key in my pocket. It was heavy brass. I pulled it out. I looked at it one last time. I thought about throwing it into the bushes. But I didn't. I placed it gently on the welcome mat. I wasn't coming back. I walked to the car. I got in. I looked in the rearview mirror. Chloe was still sleeping. I looked at the house. The kitchen light was still on. I could see Julian's silhouette in the window, head in his hands. I put the car in drive. I pulled away from the curb. I didn't speed. I drove exactly the speed limit. I turned the corner. The house disappeared from view. It was over. I let out a breath that rattled in my chest. Then I turned the radio on. I drove toward the sunrise. I'm Odette, 34 years old, and I am currently fleeing the state after bankrupting my corrupt father-in-law to save my daughter. The mile markers blurred past my window in a stream of green and white. 50 miles. That was the distance I needed before I felt safe enough to stop. My hands were cramping around the steering wheel. I had been gripping the leather so hard my knuckles had turned a translucent white. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder of a desolate service road, dust billowing up around the tires. The engine idled, a low hum that vibrated through the floorboards and into the soles of my feet. I looked at the dashboard clock. 6:02 a.m. Arthur was awake. He was in his study. He was logging in. Right now, at this exact second, he was typing his password. He was expecting to see 8 figures. He was about to see a void. I reached into the passenger seat and flipped open the laptop one last time. I had tethered it to my phone's hotspot for 30 seconds. That was all I needed. The email was already drafted. I had written it 3 weeks ago in my head over and over while I scrubbed his floors and tolerated his insults. To IRS Criminal Investigation Division anonymous tip line. Subject: tax fraud, money laundering, and offshore accounts regarding Arthur Blackwood. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I wasn't just giving them the smoke. I was giving them the gun, the bullets, and the fingerprints. I attached the files. The forensic accounting of the shell companies. The recordings of him bribing the senator. And finally, the kill shot. I typed it into the body of the email. Physical vault access code 88249 Zulu. Location: behind the bookshelf in the East Wing study. He thought that vault was secure. He thought it was where he kept his insurance. Now it was just a metal box full of evidence waiting for the feds to crack it open. I hit send. The progress bar zipped across the screen. Message sent. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet car. I disconnected the hotspot. And then it happened. My phone, resting in the cup holder, lit up. It vibrated violently against the plastic. The screen flashed a photo I had assigned years ago, a picture of Arthur unsmiling in a tuxedo. Incoming call, Arthur Blackwood. My heart stopped. It physically stopped beating for a terrifying second, he knew. He was standing in his office, likely gripping the edge of his mahogany desk, staring at a balance of $0. He wasn't calling to ask how I was. He was calling to threaten my life. He was calling to scream. He was calling to unleash a monster that I had just declawed. I stared at the phone. I watched it buzz. I watched the name dance across the screen. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt power. For 7 years, that ringtone had made me flinch. It had made me straighten my posture and fix my hair. It had commanded my obedience. Now it was just noise. I picked up the phone. I didn't answer it. I flipped it over. I used the small metal pin I had taped to the back of the case. I jammed it into the side of the device. The SIM card tray popped out. The phone went dead mid-ring. Silence flooded the car instantly. It was heavy and absolute. I pulled the tiny chip out with my fingernails. It was such a small thing. A piece of plastic and silicone the size of a fingernail clipping, but it held my location. It held my history. It held his leash on me. I rolled down the window. The morning air smelled like wet asphalt and pine. I looked down at the drainage ditch running alongside the road. Dark, murky water stagnated at the bottom, choked with weeds. I flicked the SIM card. It spun through the air, catching the light for a brief second. It landed in the water with a soundless plip. Gone. I was a ghost. I rolled the window up. I took a breath. It rattled in my chest, shaky and uneven, but it went deep. I filled my lungs until they pressed against my ribs. I exhaled. I looked in the rearview mirror. Chloe was still asleep in her car seat. Her head was lolled to the side, her mouth slightly open. She looked so small. She had no idea that her grandfather was currently destroying his office in a blind rage 50 miles behind us. She had no idea that her mother had just secured her future by burning down her past. "We're okay," I whispered to the reflection in the glass. I meant it. For the first time since I walked down the aisle into the Blackwood family, I actually meant it. The Blackwood empire was a hollow shell. It was a rotting house that I had just condemned. And I was the one who walked away with the core. I put the car in drive. I pulled back onto the highway. The road ahead was wide, gray, and open. I didn't check the mirrors anymore. There was nothing behind me worth looking at. I pressed my foot down on the gas. I drove toward the border.